So, would you say that the idea of the death of God, for example, in Zizek's reading, it's this idea that, uh, well, essentially that there is no big other, right? Or the big other is itself uh, barred, inconsistent, antagonistic. And so there's no ability to depend on that other. So that's essentially what's lost with the death of God, is this dependency upon an external, transcendent other. And I think in the same, that's essentially the same thing for Nietzsche. So, I mean, I think this area of the death of God is probably where the connections between Nietzsche and Hegel would be probably very fruitful because, I mean, they both use similar terminology even, and I don't think they're that conceptually distinct. So, how would you even read Nietzsche's proclamation of the death of God? Because um, just there's one video I made on Levi Bryant's understanding of it, and it's essentially that God is the form or essence or identity, the one. And when you get to this purely, um, uh, when you get into a reality that's purely immanent, there's no other, no big other anymore. You get a flawed and inconsistent reality. Um, so yeah, I'm just wondering, how do you read the death of God? Right?
Yeah, in Nietzsche, it's explicitly about the loss of perfect being. So, like any idea that we could have a relationship with a perfect other, an other that can depend on. You can, I mean, in psychoanalytic terms, you could interpret this as the relics of the infantile psyche's relationship with the womb, or the infantile psyche's relationship with the original relationship with the mother, as some sort of dependency that you have. You can depend on this other. Like, even think about what it would be like to exist inside a womb. And we often don't think about the fact that all of us start in such a condition for a long period of time. And it's kind of like the starting point, the starting conditions for all of our psychological processes, which open up after birth. In any case, Nietzsche is basically saying that we can no longer hold this childlike image of a perfect being, and that we have to undergo that. A lot of what the Overman is about is confronting the imperfection of being, and to still show up and shine, to still show up and shine for others. So because there's no other in the big O sense, the real challenge is to shine up for others. And that requires an extraordinarily difficult spiritual transformation process, because it's hard to exist in this world, and it's hard to exist in relationship to how imperfect other people are. And so, like, for example, the first major confrontation that Zarathustra's character has is with a saint in the woods. And this saint in the woods says, don't go to humans. Humans are imperfect. I can't go to humans. Humans would kill me. Humans are so imperfect, they're fatal to me. And he says, instead, love animals, or love God and love animals, the saint says. And Nietzsche sort of, respects sort of what the saint in the woods is saying, but, mostly muses to himself about how the saint doesn't yet know that God is dead and so forth. But what I interpret this to mean is that, and like what I've seen in my own life is, like, I do think that people can use God and can use their self-posit. This is crucial. People can use their self-posited concept of God, and people can use animals, their pets and so forth, as a way to escape the reality of dealing with the imperfection of other people and building real deep sort of relationships, what sort of Nietzsche will point towards as sort of companions or friendships. A friend is someone that Nietzsche sees as someone who can bestow an entire world as opposed to the neighbor who's just sort of someone you might gossip with or share sort of little superficial aspects of your reality and so forth. So I hope that gives sort of a perspective on at least how Nietzsche is thinking about this.
No, yeah, that was great. And actually, that was such a good point. About sorry, I'm blanking. I'm a little tired. You're talking about yeah, the animals and God, right? So like, you know how instead of getting into real relationships with real people, you sort of get lost in you know not real people. And the thing that I was actually thinking about was there's a whole debate, and this will seem off topic, but it really isn't. There's a whole debate between Protestants and Catholics and Orthodox Christians about sacraments, and particularly the sacrament of confession. And Protestants will be like, why do you need to confess in front of a priest who's a mediator? Why do you need a mediator? Why can't you go right to God and confess your sins? And I think that what came to me, and I'm sure this has been said before, it just seems so obvious to me, is that um like you have an easier time confessing your sins than confessing in front of a priest. So that means that you don't have a personal relationship with God yet. So I think the real Christian vision of a spiritual journey is that you no longer need this mediation, but at the beginning you essentially do. And I guess the point here is that I think this is an example of a sort of common cultural Christian who's like, yeah, I pray every now and then, I confess to God. It's not a real belief, and that's something, of course, Jordan Peterson talks about a lot. How Christians, they confess to believe these very crazy things, honestly, but they're not living like they do. So, would you say that Nietzsche sort of provides a real path or a way to live your life uh, that will lead to a sort of growth and a positive change and like a real conviction to the way you live your life, and not just sort of like the groundlessness of modern consumerist existence?
Um, well, like as it relates to does Nietzsche provide a real path and a way to live a life towards growth outside of consumerism? I think, I mean, absolutely. We can always use books or intellectual work in a superficial way, right? Like, which I think you were potentially, and we can always form identities which are contradictory as it relates to what we say we believe and how we're actually acting. So like I think that might be a little bit what you're pointing towards with Christians professing to believe crazy things but not living like they do. But I mean, I think if you read Nietzsche very close to the body, namely if you read Nietzsche very close to the way you're living your life, I do think that you get a type of ground which is constantly calling for self-overcoming and constant attention to the discord within yourself, the loneliness within yourself, the cracks within yourself, which are the positive material for that self-overcoming. And certainly it's a type of that sort of relationship if you're willing to sort of embody that ethic, so to speak, which I would sort of say is a post-Kantian ethic. Does let's say attempt to work beyond both the ground of the state and the market. And I think that that's something that I hope to bring out in the Thus Spoke Zarathustra course, is that Nietzsche is not a friend of either the state or the market in my reading. He I think quite elegantly expresses caution to ground yourself in a type of market-based consumerism. He also cautions you against grounding yourself in state identification. So he's pointing beyond both and towards the overman. And yeah, I mean, to actually include that within your own life process, like it requires huge hurdles and challenges, right? Like, so for example, like if I was embedding my identity inside the state, it would kind of be me intellectually submitting to the university because the university is state funded. It would be me submitting to the structures and the hierarchies of the state in that regard. The fact that I didn't do that, the fact that I was sort of more trying to carve out, my own sort of intellectual trajectory, also means that I have to confront the paradoxes and the mess of the market, which produces whole new problems and whole new challenges, of trying to, like, for example, market, something that I think is divine or something that I think is sacred, which contradicts, I think, the whole principles of the noisiness and the absurdity of market dynamics and stuff like that. So, it really, if you read Nietzsche close to the bone, close to the body, close to the blood, yeah, you are given a type of ground, but it's not a ground which is sort of like a safe place to be. It's kind of the metaphor he uses in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which I like quite a lot, is he says, free spirits build their nest out of an abyss. So that's the ground.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking, like the ground is sort of this self-propelling wheel, the way
Yeah.
Nietzsche describes the child. You made such a good point about the market, how Nietzsche doesn't really fall into the logic of the state or the market. And it's interesting in the parable of the madman, Nietzsche, who are the ones laughing at him who is proclaiming the death of God? It's the people at the market. And these people at the market, they are atheists. Like they don't believe in God. They laugh at the madman for talking about God, but in a way they haven't what you were talking about, like confronting. They haven't confronted the depth of their own convictions. So I can sort of see how as you how this would relate to this idea of constructing your ground being your own abyss. It's sort of like you're confronting that the fact that what the madman has confronted in a way, and Nietzsche and the Overmen, is that there is no ground for you to receive, that you actually have to build it for yourself.